Danta Wright sat in court smiling and nearly laughing as a mother shed tears for her son shot and killed by Wright.
I've lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of having grandchildren. I've lost the enjoyment of holidays and birthdays and of everyday life.
Wright addressed the court showing no remorse.
I just want to tell y'all, I'll be home soon. R.I.P. Keon. I love my family.
The judge, clearly fed up with the defendant's attitude, stopped the proceedings and asked prosecution to consider taking this case to trial, where Wright would face a stiffer punishment if found guilty by a jury.
But watching you sit there, smile, laugh, and shake your head like this was no big deal, I'm very tempted to just say, I'm not going to accept this sentence agreement. We'll go to trial, and if you're convicted of felony murder, you'll go to prison for the rest of your life. That means you'll die there.
This is not the first
After
time.
gunning down an 18-year-old boy with a bright future, most killers would cower in shame when facing the victim's grieving family. But not Danta Wright Jr. In a Michigan courtroom, this 17-year-old did the unthinkable. As Jordan Clee's mother poured out her pain, Wright didn't bow his head. He didn't show remorse. He laughed. He smirked. And then, in a move that left the courtroom gasping, he taunted the family with a chilling promise. I'll be home soon.
I just want to tell y'all, I'll be home soon. R.I.P. Keon. I love my family.
The arrogance was so shocking that Judge David Swartz admitted he nearly threw out the plea deal on the spot. At one point, the possibility of sentencing Wright to an effective 285 years in prison was raised. And only then, when the weight of centuries behind bars loomed over him, did the smirk finally fade. For the first time, Wright seemed to grasp the reality of what he had done. But by then, it was too late. The damage was irreversible. A promising young man lay in the grave, a family was broken beyond repair, and a teenager who thought he was untouchable was about to learn the hard truth. Even the young can face consequences that last a lifetime. This is the story of Danta Wright, the teenager who murdered Jordan Clee, laughed at his grieving family, and became a symbol of how cold and reckless violence can destroy not just one life, but two. Meanwhile, years before the courtroom showdown, Danta Wright Jr. was growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Born on August 29, 1999, he came of age in a city better known for its college town charm and middle-class stability than for street violence. But Wright's world looked very different. By his teenage years, he was no longer just another boy in the neighborhood. He was entangled in the darker rhythms of gang life. Tattoos of six-point stars and pitchforks, emblems tied to the gangster disciples, inked his arms, serving as both identity and warning. School could not hold him. He was eventually expelled. Instead, his days became a blur of petty crimes, recording rap lyrics that glorified violence, and constantly running from police lights flashing in his rearview mirror. In 2016, after one arrest for fleeing officers, Wright was released on bond. It could have been a turning point, a moment to step back, reassess, and change course. But instead, he doubled down. He went deeper into the gang culture, chasing reputation, chasing danger, and chasing the kind of fast respect that never lasts. And while Wright was sinking further into the underworld, another young man in Ann Arbor was preparing for a future filled with hope. A teenager with a life worth protecting. A teenager whose path would fatally intersect with Wright's. While Danta Wright's life was spiraling into the streets, Jordan Clee was carving out a very different story. Born and raised in Ann Arbor, Jordan was just 18 years old, a high school senior with everything ahead of him. He wasn't a troublemaker, he wasn't chasing shortcuts, he was a young man who believed in working hard, staying loyal, and building a future he could be proud of. Friends described him as the kind of person you could always count on. Steady, funny, the one who had your back. His teachers saw promise in him. His family saw love and potential wrapped into one bright, determined soul. Jordan dreamed of graduating, of taking the next steps into adulthood, of giving back to the people who had supported him. To his mother, Jordan wasn't just her son, he was her pride, her anchor, her reason to keep pushing forward. He brought warmth into the house, laughter into family dinners, and a sense of hope that no matter how tough life got, he would succeed. But that promise, that light, would be stolen in an instant. Because while Jordan was preparing for college, for dreams, for the next chapter, someone else was preparing to take it all away. It was October 4th, 2016, a cool autumn evening in Ann Arbor, Michigan. For Jordan Klee, it should have been just another night. At 18, he was the kind of teenager who still carried that restless energy of youth, but also the discipline of someone building his future. He didn't know that when he stepped out that evening, he was walking toward the last moments of his life. On the other side of town, Danta Wright was moving with a different purpose. At just 17, Wright was already living like a man twice his age, hardened, reckless, consumed by the image of being feared. Alongside him were two accomplices, friends who shared their loyalty to the street life. They weren't thinking about tomorrow or about who they would destroy. They were thinking about money, reputation, and proving themselves to a world that only rewarded violence. The plan was simple, a robbery. Jordan was lured out, made to believe he was meeting up for something routine, harmless. He had no idea that Wright and his crew had already decided he would be the target. To them, he wasn't a boy with a family or a student with a future. He was just an opportunity. In the quiet darkness, Jordan found himself surrounded. Words were exchanged. Demands were made. Fear must have struck him as he realized what was happening, that the boys he was facing weren't just bluffing, that this wasn't going to be something he could walk away from. Then came the gun. A single shot tore through the night, echoing louder than anything Ann Arbor had heard in years. Jordan Klee collapsed, his life ending in an instant. A young man filled with potential was gone, left lifeless in the woods. For Wright and his accomplices, there was no pause, no reflection. They fled, the rush of adrenaline masking the finality of what they had just done. To them, it was just another move in the dangerous game they had chosen to play. But to Jordan's family, the silence that followed would last forever.
The discovery of his body shook the community. Friends couldn't comprehend how Jordan, the loyal and dependable classmate, could be gone so suddenly. His mother's world shattered, forced to face a nightmare no parent should ever endure. And while Ann Arbor mourned, detectives began piecing together the puzzle, determined to find out who had pulled the trigger. That night drew a line in the sand, separating the boy Jordan was from the man Wright claimed to be. One life stolen, another thrown away, and a city that would never forget the night innocence was traded for violence. When the call came in that a young man's body had been found in a wooded area of Ann Arbor, detectives knew they weren't dealing with an accident. The medical examiner confirmed the worst, a fatal gunshot wound. This wasn't random, it was targeted, deliberate. Detectives immediately began retracing Jordan's last steps, who he had seen, who he had texted, and where he had gone that night. His phone records pointed them in a direction, conversations that suggested a meetup, one that suddenly turned sinister. Meanwhile, whispers started spreading through Ann Arbor's streets. The name Danta Wright came up more than once. 17 years old, already known to police for fleeing from officers and for his ties to the gangster disciples, Wright was no stranger to trouble. The tattoos on his body told a story of allegiance, of a teenager trying to carve his place in gang life. Detectives dug deeper. Witness interviews began connecting dots. Wright hadn't been alone. Two accomplices were identified, friends who had been with him on the night Jordan was killed. Surveillance footage and phone data began painting a clearer picture. Jordan hadn't walked into a random encounter. He had been lured. As evidence mounted, Ann Arbor police moved in. Wright and his associates were taken into custody. Even in handcuffs, Wright displayed a chilling lack of concern, as though the weight of a murder charge didn't register. The case against him solidified quickly. Ballistics tied the weapon to the shooting. Testimonies placed him at the scene. The narrative of a botched robbery turned homicide became undeniable. And when prosecutors looked at the facts, a teenager killed, another laughing at the wreckage, they knew this wasn't just about justice for one family. It was about making sure the city knew that even the young could be held accountable for unimaginable crimes. The stage was now set for a courtroom battle, one that would expose not just the crime, but the character of the boy accused of pulling the trigger. The courthouse in Washtenaw County was packed the day Danta Wright Jr. appeared before Judge David Swartz. Families, reporters, and community members filled the benches, waiting to see the face of the teenager accused of gunning down 18-year-old Jordan Klee. For Jordan's loved ones, it was a moment heavy with grief. For Wright, it was another stage, and the way he carried himself shocked everyone inside those walls. By this point, Wright had agreed to a plea deal. Instead of facing life in prison, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, armed robbery, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, and a firearms violation. The deal guaranteed he would serve decades, but spared him the possibility of never walking free again. To the family of Jordan Klee, no measure of time behind bars could ever restore the son, the friend, the life that had been stolen. What stayed with them, and with the community, was not just the brutality of the crime, but the haunting image of a teenager laughing in the face of a family's pain.
The trial was over. Justice, at least in the eyes of the law, had been served. But the scars left behind, in that courtroom, in that family, in that city, would never fully heal. The case of Danta Wright Jr. and Jordan Klee is not just another entry in the annals of crime. It is a story of choices and of consequences that ripple far beyond a single moment. Jordan was 18. He should have had decades to live, to love, to build the future his mother had dreamed for him. Instead, his life ended in the woods on an October night, stolen in an act of senseless violence. To those who knew him, Jordan remains frozen in time, forever young, forever promised, forever missed. On the other side stands Wright. At 17, he still had time to change his path, but instead of turning away from the streets, he embraced them. Instead of building a future, he destroyed one. Now he spends his days behind prison walls. Tattoos on his arms are a reminder of the identity he chose. His laughter in that courtroom forever remembered as a symbol of defiance and lost humanity. Two teenagers from the same city. Two boys who could have been classmates, teammates, even friends. One made choices rooted in hope, the other in destruction. And the collision of their lives ended with one buried and the other cased. For Ann Arbor, the case left a scar. For Jordan's family, it left an emptiness that can never be filled. And for anyone watching, it left a question worth asking. How many more futures will be lost to the streets? How many more Jordans? How many more Dantas before the cycle breaks? Because in the end, this story isn't just about crime. It's about the fragile line between what could have been and what will never be.